Hello, everybody. Let me start with this view. Happy Friday. Good afternoon. My name is Nate. I am the marketing and community lead for Laterpress. If you are tuning in for the first time, we are continuing a series. Trying to do two of these every week on Tuesdays and Fridays, working on an urban fantasy romantic comedy with the assistance of Laterpress's AI story tools. So we have been working on this for several weeks now. I am doing the vast majority of the work on stream, though some editing does happen off stream, and some things are being temporarily skipped for the moment to keep forward progression moving on the story, with the end goal of having a published book available for everybody to read, to have an example of what things can look like with collaboration between your mind, your ideas, and AI story tools to help get you there. So, if you're tuning in for the first time, the concept of our story is that Tessa, our female protagonist, works as a therapist for people's familiars, and our male protagonist Eddie works as a grief counselor for the spirits of the recently departed who have regrets in their life, and he kind of helps process their regrets. So they're both kind of therapists in their own way. They both have their own kind of mental baggage. They're paired up by a magical dating app that says that these two are going to be great for each other. Their first date is an absolute train wreck. And after that, the app traps them in a 60-minute time loop, forcing them to basically try the date over and over again. But of course, it's not going to be exactly the same thing because that would be boring. But basically, through different time loops, get to know each other better, work out their own differences, and realize they are actually good for each other. The dating app is kind of I would call him a pseudo antagonist because Cupid's behavior can be antagonistic. But in this story, Cupid is ultimately correct, and the app's heart is in the right place because these two characters are great for each other. They just have to work through their BS to get to that point. So today we have arrived at the part where the two characters meet and have their absolutely disastrous first date. So I've got the editor up here, and I'm going to go full screen mode just to cull a little bit even more distractions. And so now we've got our scene card or our beat card for this beat, which is very long. I haven't edited this. Step one is going to be to read and review this and really audit it to make sure that it says what we want to say. We may modify it, we may prune it and cull it down to the core points. And then from there, generate a scene card. Again, audit that, make sure it says what we want it to say. And then we'll generate the text. Let's see if there's one other thing I wanted to check. Assistant, is it here? Nope, that's not what I want. Is that what I just clicked? All right, I'm not going to worry about it right now. As we can see, we've got some notes from other chapters as I read through those. But let's review the meet cute or meet disaster beat here. It is described as a memorable, awkward, or ridiculous first encounter that creates instant chemistry and friction. Tessa arrives at the restaurant first, Artemis tucked into a tote bag that the host pretends not to notice. Familiars are technically allowed, but the restaurant's charm-regulated ambiance was not designed with opinionated black cats in mind. I'm going to just do this in edit mode. But the restaurant's ambiance Again, it likes just throwing charms in there and make it sound it's fantasy without it really meaning anything. The restaurant's ambiance was not designed with opinionated black cats in mind. I'm just gonna leave it at that. She's already scoped the exits, chosen the seat with the best sight line to the door, and arranged her water glass at a precise angle. When Eddie walks in, he's 2 minutes early and slightly breathless. He's stopped on the way to help a confused spirit who materialized in a crosswalk and couldn't figure out why no one was stopping for him. He doesn't mention this. Well, if he doesn't mention this, then why do we care? I'm just looking for early calls before diving into deeper, more meaningful changes. He straightens his jacket, spots Tessa, and smiles with the full wattage warmth of a man who has decided this evening is going to go well. It does not go well. Eddie, determined to set an honest tone and skip the small talk performance he's always found hollow, opens with a confession. He works with the dead, which means he's acutely aware of how much time people waste not saying what they mean, and he'd rather just skip to the real stuff. It's genuine, it's also a lot. Tessa, whose entire professional life is built around recognizing when someone is using disclosure as a defense mechanism, reflexively shifts into clinical mode. She nods, tilts her head at the precise therapeutic angle, and says, "That sounds like it could be rooted in anticipatory grief. There's actually a real well-documented pattern in attachment theory where proximity to mortality accelerates." Eddie blinks. He did not come here to be assessed. He came here to connect. He tries to redirect, but Tessa, now slightly nervous and defaulting harder into her professional armor, keeps annotating his sentences. He mentions that he finds most first dates feel performative. She wonders aloud whether that's avoidant framing. He says he's always been told he comes on strong. She asks with genuine clinical curiosity whether he thinks that's a pattern or situational. He starts to feel like a case study. He acts like one. Eddie's response to feeling analyzed is to double down. He gets more intense, more declarative, more urgent in his self-presentation, which is exactly the wrong move. Tess reads the escalating energy as confirmation of her concerns and retreats further behind the glass wall of professional detachment. Artemis, watching from the tote bag with her chin resting on the zipper, begins a quiet running commentary that only Tessa can hear. He said he likes long walks, and you asked if that was a coping behavior. You're doing it again. Tessa hisses at her to be quiet. Eddie notices Tessa hissing at the bag and decides not to ask. The food arrives and things briefly stabilize. There's a moment over the bread course where they accidentally agree enthusiastically and in unison that the city's new transit ward system is a bureaucratic disaster. And for about 90 seconds, they're just two people having a normal, funny conversation. Artemis perks up. Then Eddie, buoyed by the moment, leans forward and says he feels like they have a real connection. And Tessa, startled by how much she agrees and how frightening that is, immediately begins cataloging why that feeling might not be trustworthy. She doesn't say this out loud. What she says is, "It's interesting how quickly we project compatibility onto strangers in high-stakes social contexts." Eddie stares at her. The bread goes cold. By the entrees arrive, they've privately concluded that the other is the kind of person who should not be dating. Eddie thinks Tessa is emotionally unavailable and hiding behind jargon. Tessa thinks Eddie is an intensity bomb waiting to go off. They are both, in their own ways, completely correct and completely wrong. The final blow comes when a candle on the table, responding to some ambient magical fluctuation in the restaurant's charm system, or possibly the sheer emotional pressure of the evening, tips over and sets the edge of the paper menu on fire. Eddie grabs his water glass, douses it immediately, efficiently, without panic. Tessa is already on her feet. They look at each other across the small scorched circle on the tablecloth, and something almost happens. Some flicker shared absurdity, some almost laugh, and then they both look away. They stand up at the same time to end the date. They both reach for the check at the same time. They both say, "I've got it," at the same time. Then both say no, really at the same time, then fall into a horrible, polite standoff while the server watches with the expression of someone who has seen this before, but not quite like this. Artemis climbs out of the tote bag, sits on the table, and says, at a volume slightly too loud for the restaurant, "This is genuinely painful to watch." The server takes a small step back. Eddie and Tessa, united for a brief moment in shared mortification, both look at the cat. Then they split the check, say goodbye with the careful courtesy of two people who will never speak again, and walk out in opposite directions into the horizon night. The candle, still slightly smoking, flickers once, and the evening resets. So there's a lot of detail in here. It for a beat level thing, I think this is probably too much. So I think I want to prune it down a little bit to keep things more to the meat of what's important and not be too overly prescriptive about how things are going to play out. So what can we prune down here? She's already scoped the. We don't really need this. She scoped the exits. Blah blah blah. We don't need this. When Eddie walks in, he straightens his jacket, spots Tessa, and smiles. With the full wattage warmth of a man who's decided this evening is going to go well, it does not go well. Eddie decided to set an honest tone and skip the small talk. Opens with a confession. He works for the dead, which means he's acutely aware of how much time people waste not saying what they mean, and he'd rather just skip to the real stuff. Tessa, whose professional life is built around recognizing when somebody's using disclosure. I'm going to cut this qualifier. Tessa reflexively shifts into clinical mode. She nods, tilts her head to the precise therapeutic angle, and says, "That sounds like it could be rooted in anticipatory grief." Eddie blinks. He did not come here to be assessed. He came here to connect. He tries to redirect, but Tessa, now slightly nervous and defaulting harder into her professional armor, keeps annotating his sentences. Gonna call those specific examples. He starts to feel like a case study. He starts to act like one. He starts to feel like a case study. Eddie's response to feeling analyzed is to double down. Exactly the wrong move. Tessa reads the escalating energy as confirmation of her concerns and retreats further behind the glass wall of her professional attachment. Yep. Artemis begins a quiet running commentary that only Tessa can hear. Gonna leave it at that. Tessa hisses at her to be quiet. Eddie notices Tessa hissing at her bag and decides not to ask. Where they accidentally agree that the city's transit, I hate mentions of awards, the new transit system is a bureaucratic disaster. And for about 90 seconds, they're just two people having a normal, funny conversation. Artemis perks up. Then Eddie leans forward and says he feels like they have a real connection. Tessa's startled by how much she agrees and how frightening that is. Now, I haven't seen anything in here that would explain why she would feel that way. Tessa is less convinced. Or Tessa is not convinced. What she says is, it's interesting how quickly you project onto strangers in high-stakes social contexts. Eddie stares at her. I'm going to cut that. By the time entrees arrive, they've privately concluded that, yep, they're both in their ways completely correct and completely wrong. Now I'm worried if I try to modify this that it'll modify everything I've already edited, and I want to keep all of this except I want this detail to be a little more spectacular. Final bleeding comes when a table on the candle, or candle on the table, tips over and sets the edge of the paper menu on fire. Sets the paper tablecloth on fire. It's not making the tablecloth paper, just sets the tablecloth on fire. Eddie grabs his water glass, douses it immediately. I'm going to add in here, Artemis freaks out, jumping out of Tessa's purse and causing a scene. And then we can thin this up because I can already feel how the AI is going to write this as a lot of duplicative dialogue. They fall into a horrible, polite standoff while the server watches with the expression, while the server watches. Just delete. Artemis sits on the table because I already have Artemis jumping out of the bag now, and says at a volume slightly too loud. Not slightly. At a volume much too loud for the restaurant. This is genuinely painful to watch. Eddie and Tessa united for one brief moment in shared mortification. Both look at the cat. Then they split the check, say goodbye. And walk out in opposite directions into the horizon night. All right, we'll save that. So that's still long, but I condensed it down into some of the more critical and important elements of what it was going for here. And so now going to generate scenes. And because that was pretty descriptive of how things are going to play out. Actually, I didn't think I was going to put anything in here, but I'm going to see what happens. I want the scenes to be from, I want the date scene to be from Tessa's POV. And let's give it a minute to do its thing. And now it's probably going to generate multiple scenes, even though all of that is really an extended summary for one. So I've had something going on with my eyes the last couple days. So I'm going to see what it comes up with. I will probably consolidate some of this into one scene card. I may also, as an experiment, just copy what the beat card says and make that into a scene card and just maybe duplicative, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, that's a pretty good summary of the scene, so let's go with it. But I want to see how it breaks that. It's going to break this down and then make decisions. Okay. I did not expect it to make 1, 2, 3, 4. The first date is not 5 chapters, so we're definitely calling some of this. Tessa arrives at the restaurant. So it's adding in details. It's kind of expanding on it there. The bread arrives. So it split all of that into 5 scenes. Bread course, the entree, and it's kept all of this in Tessa's POV. Okay, now I want to test something here. I generate a scene card. Can I forget what our character limits are for scene cards. I'm going to copy all of that. General, Tessa. Okay, yeah, so that is too much to fit in one scene card. Okay, so I'm going to delete this chapter. Tessa arrives at, so I really want to see, I'm really debating that, wondering now how far it's going to write each of these. And if it's going to write ahead or if it's going to stick within what it's supposed to do. But this is not 5 chapters worth of content, so 20 minutes early, sliding in a corner booth with Artemis zipped into a structured leather tote bag resting on the seat beside her. Host, again, charm, blah, blah, blah. Glances at the bag, clocks the pair. Wisely says nothing. Okay, what is going to be the most efficient way to smooth that out? That it broke down. The entire issue is that this is too long for the character limit for individual scene cards. scene. Where did it end? Then Eddie, buoyed by the moment. Okay, so I got a little over half of it. So just cut this here. Save. Scene card. Start here, grab the rest. I don't know that this is going to work, but I want to experiment because I have not tried doing things this way before. So why is it, yeah, primary character. First date, beat, card, split. Okay, so we've got it's writing the scene, it's in Tessa's POV as requested, so we don't have to worry that about that visual bug. So I'm going to let it write out its thing, and I want to make sure that it ends roughly where this goes, and as long as it does, then I will generate the other half too, and we'll see where we're at for this chapter. I can't read it as fast as it's coming, so I'm not. Okay, so we've got the bread that arrived. Oh my God, stop using the word wards. Not everything is a ward. And this is why we edit. The faintest word, tentative, almost hopeful. Okay, so it seems like it did stop at the correct point. Okay, I don't like that it was so on the nose. For 90 seconds, maybe less, there were two people sitting across from each other. Okay, well, it did stop at the correct place, though. And so that much of it was, oh boy, we're going to do some pruning. Let me tell you what. That half of it was 3,114 words. All right, so now I'm going to let it generate the other half. While it's doing that, I need to step aside for just a minute here. I will be right back, probably by the time this generates, then we can review everything. Okay, I am back. It is still doing its thing. We're reaching for the check. We're getting near the end here. Okay. So we got the whole thing into one chapter by turning the beat into two different scene cards. And this chapter ended up being 6,077 words, which I think, this is a substantial chapter, but that is probably overkill. So we're going to look to prune. And meanwhile, I'm going to delete these extra chapters because we have accomplished what we needed to in the one. Okay. So now, next step here is read through the chapter. I'm not going to make any instant edits at this point. All I am going to do is, well, if something is super, super obvious, like I want to cut it, then I'll just delete it. But most stuff I think I'm going to bold if it's something I want to go back and revise. And I'll kind of explain why as we go what it is I think needs to be changed about it or why I wouldn't keep it or revise it. But let's kind of dive in and see what we've got here. The host at Lume was exactly the kind of person Tessa hoped for and dreaded in equal measure. Impeccably groomed, warmly professional, and dressed, and possessed of a diplomatic blindness so finely tuned it could only have been cultivated through years of service in Horizon's charm-regulated. I have seen it throw charm-regulated, charm this, ward that. It's fantasy-sounding gibberish. We're going to get rid of that. Just say in service of Horizon's dining scene. The sentence works fine there. I actually think most of this is fine, but I might dial up diplomatic blindness. I might rephrase that a tiny bit. He glanced at the structured leather tote bag in Tessa's arm, registered the pair of luminous green eyes blinking at him from a gap in the zipper, and smiled as though he had seen nothing more remarkable than a handbag. I don't know what structured means in this context. I'm not a purse guy or a tote bag guy. I'm just going to say glanced at the leather tote. Smiled as if he had seen nothing more remarkable. I might rephrase that to say hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. It's that's a tiny edit there. A table for two under the CUPID reservation. That's me. Tessa adjusted the tote strap on her shoulder. Inside, Artemis shifted. One black ear poked up through the zipper gap like a periscope. I do like that detail. The host led her through the dining room with the practiced grace of a man navigating a minefield of floating candles and mood curated lighting. Leave that at floating candles. With the practiced grace of a man used to navigating a minefield of floating candles. Because now I think that clarifies more that we're imagining floating candles. There is an actual detail there. Lume had been designed for intimacy, low ceilings, enchanted to mimic a twilight sky. Table is spaced far enough apart to suggest privacy. Far enough apart for privacy. A wine list organized by emotional register rather than Grape varietal. Don't love that. The ambient ward hummed at the edges of Tessa's perception. Again, why does it love wards? That means nothing to me. The ambient ward hummed at the edge of Tessa's perception, smoothing the noise of neighboring conversations into a pleasant murmur. It was objectively a beautiful restaurant. It was also, Tessa thought as she slid into the corner booth, the kind of place that made first dates feel like auditions. Close, but I might tweak that a little bit. She settled the tote bag on the seat beside her and unzipped it another inch. Artemis's face appeared in the gap, whiskers twitching as she surveyed the room. Don't start, Tessa whispered. I haven't said anything. You're about to. Artemis blinked slowly, the feline equivalent of cracking her knuckles. The candles are floating, the napkins folded into swans. There's a string quartet playing somewhere that I can hear but cannot see. This place is trying very hard. It's nice. It's a stage set. Artemis rested her chin on the zipper's teeth. You picked the corner booth so you could watch the door. You're 20 minutes early. You've already identified 2 exits in the path to the restroom. I like to be prepared. You like to be fortified. Artemis's green eyes tracked upward towards Tessa. There's a difference. So I've noticed this framing a lot by default with AI-generated text. It'll say something, and then it'll play like, but this. Like, don't lie. I can tell when you're lying. Don't this. I can that. That's a linguistic structure that I feel is a little overused. I'm going to call that out. Also, she's led to the table, right? The host led them through the dining room. Yes, I wouldn't say that she chose this. So we'll revisit that line. Tessa didn't answer. She pulled out her phone and opened Eddie's CUPID profile for what she told herself was the last time. His photo stared back at her, dark eyes, an open smile, the kind of face that looked like it was always mid-sentence. Not sure I like that. She scrolled through his personal statement again, her mind already tagging phrases with invisible sticky notes. I don't believe in wasting time. Urgency-driven framing, possible avoidant anxious oscillation. So I'm going to flag this right now, even though I don't know if I'm going to change any of it, just because she's going to get into this kind of talk during her conversation with Eddie, and I am worried this is going to be a potential redundancy. So I'm going to bold that as a warning to myself for later. She scrolled through his personal statement again, her mind already tagging phrases, yep, blah, 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 blah. She caught herself and set the phone face down on the table. Your heart rate just changed. Artist murmured from the bag. I can hear it from here. It did not. It absolutely did. So this is this kind of childish, I did the thing. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. And I'm not a big fan of that either. We're going to... So I think I'm just going to annihilate all of that. Whoops, make that a paragraph. She caught herself and set the phone face down on the table. She smoothed the napkin swan into a flat rectangle with more force than the linen deserved. Across the restaurant, she noticed a woman sitting alone at the bar, elegantly dressed in a way that seemed effortless but precise. Dark hair swept back, nursing a glass of rosé with the unhurried calm of someone who had nowhere else to be and knew it. The woman's gaze moved across the room with a quality Tessa couldn't quite name, not scanning, not searching, but watching, the way someone watches a play, they've seen before but still enjoy. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The woman smiled faintly and turned back to her wine. Tessa forgot about her immediately because the front door opened and Eddie walked in. Okay. I'm going to underline this instead of bold it, but I think all of that is completely unnecessary. So when we're talking about pruning down the word count and keeping the good, I think that's some of the stuff that's going to get pruned. He paused just out inside the entrance, one hand rising to straighten the collar of his jacket, a gesture so automatic it had to be habitual, the kind of thing a person did before walking into rooms where they wanted to be taken seriously. The host pointed towards the corner booth. Eddie's eyes found Tessa, and his face broke into a smile that was immediate, unguarded, and calibrated to a wattage that suggested he had already decided, somewhere between his apartment and this restaurant, that tonight was going to go well. Okay, so no, that worked for summary, but I'm not sure I love that in Tessa's POV. I want her to have at least an initial good impression of him before he opens his mouth, and then he's going to immediately ruin it because he comes on way, way too strong. Tessa's stomach flipped. Her clinical instincts activated simultaneously, like a smoke detector triggered by someone lighting a birthday candle. Oh, something's going on with my left eye. He smiles like that at everyone, she murmured, mostly to herself. You don't know that, Artemis said. You've known him for 4 seconds. And he reached the table in 6 long strides. Up close, he was taller than his photo suggested, with the slightly rumpled energy of someone who moved through the world at a pace the world hadn't agreed to. His jacket was nice but not new. His shoes were polished. He carried no visible charms or spirit consultation tools, which Tessa noted with a flicker of something that might have been relief, might have been disappointment that she couldn't immediately categorize him. That sounds like fantasy nonsense. Tessa, he extended a hand, then seemed to reconsider, then committed to it anyway. Again, let's get rid of a little bit of his neuroticness. His handshake was warm and firm and lasted exactly 1 second too long. Eddie, it's really great to meet you. You too, she gestured to the seat across from her. Got here a little early. No, that's great. I appreciate punctuality. Time is. He stopped himself, laughed, and sat down. Sorry, I was about to say something about time being precious, and then I promised myself I wouldn't lead with that. Lead with what? Again, the duplicative phrasing, lead with blah, blah, blah. We're going to let him go another couple seconds before he shoots himself in the foot. And he settled into his chair, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked at her with an expression of such deliberate openness that Tessa could almost see him removing armor in real time, except that the performance of removing armor was itself a kind of armor, and she recognized it because she wore her own version of that every day. Again, pruning. Okay, he said, I'm going to be honest with you because I think that's the only way to start something that matters. Tessa felt her posture shift, micro adjustment, invisible to anyone who wasn't trained to notice. Her shoulders settled, her chin lifted a fraction, her head tilted to the left at an angle she had perfected across 10,000 therapy sessions. The listening angle. The I'm fully present, so no, we don't need double. I think I'm going to italicize that for emphasis. I work with the dead, Eddie said, spirits, people who don't move on because they left something unsaid or undone. People who didn't. Oh, okay. I sit with them, I help them figure out what's keeping them here, and I help them let go. He paused, not for effect, but because the next part mattered to him. And what I've learned from that work, what it's taught me over and over, is that people waste an unbelievable amount of time not saying what they mean. They hedge, they perform. We're doing the three thing. 1, 2, 3. They have an entire relationships built on small talk and never once say the thing that's actually in their chest. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers. I don't want to do that, not tonight. I'd rather skip the part where we pretend to be interested in each other's favorite movies and get to the real stuff, the stuff that matters. Okay, I think you've said the stuff that matters a couple times. I'm just going to call that for editing. I'm going to highlight this whole monologue because this is Eddie's character to come on way too strong, but I think I would edit that down. It was genuine. Tessa could see that clearly. The sincerity in his face, the slight tremor in his voice that said his speech had cost him something to deliver. He meant every word. It was also objectively a lot. 1, 2. Okay, that was only 2. Just could see the sincerity in his face. He meant every word. It was also objectively a lot. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Tessa felt two things happen simultaneously. A warm pull toward the raw honesty of what he'd said, and the immediate reflexive activation of every diagnostic framework she'd ever internalized. The pull lost. There is some good in here, because we do want these two characters to be attracted to each other. It is, after all, a rom-com, and we're going to end up with our happily ever after ending. So I like what it is doing with the giving us some attraction here, but then also her own mental BS and being in therapy mode with everybody. I'm highlighting this not because I think it's bad, but because it is on the right track, and I want to think about that line to see if I can make it go even harder. But this would stay for sure in some form. That sounds like it could be rooted in anticipatory grief, she said. Eddie blinked. The warmth in his expression didn't vanish, but it flickered like a candle in a drift. I'm sorry? The urgency, Tessa said, and she could hear herself doing it, hear the clinical register sliding into place like a visor snapping down. But the machinery was already in motion, and she didn't know how to stop it without leaving herself exposed. I think I might just stop it at stop it. The need to skip past the surface and get to what you're calling the real stuff. When someone works closely with mortality and loss, it's very common to develop a compressed timeline for emotional intimacy. You begin to treat every interaction as if it might be your last, which creates a sense of, I wasn't, Eddie straightened in his chair. That wasn't a clinical statement. That was me trying to be honest with you. And I appreciate that. I do. Tessa nodded with the measured warmth of a professional validating a client's emotional risk. I'm just observing that the framework you're using to approach connection might be influenced by occupational exposure to. Are you assessing me right now? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Tessa's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. I am just making an observation. It feels like an intake interview. I need to reflect on these lines. I think Eddie would probably know Tessa's line of work from details provided in the CUPID matching. So those aren't, it's not completely, I'm sorry, my eyes, something is going on with them today. It's not completely out of character for him to be making those statements, but I might phrase things a different way. From the tote bag beside Tessa's hip, a low voice murmured, "He's not wrong." Tessa's hand shot into the bag's zipper and pressed it closed another inch. Eddie's gaze flickered to the movement, then back to her face. He chose not to ask. Look, he said, resetting. He placed his palms flat on the table again, a gesture recognized as a self-soothing thought grounding, and she hated that she recognized it, hated that her brain wouldn't stop filing and sorting and labeling when all she wanted to do was sit across from a man and have dinner. I don't think this is wrong, but that's another thing I might prune or rephrase a little bit. Just highlight the whole sentence. I don't mean to come on strong. I've been on dates where I spend 2 hours talking about nothing, and then you go home and realize you don't know a single thing about the other person. I just wanted this to be different. I understand that impulse, Tessa said, and it's worth examining where it comes from. Eddie's jaw tightened. It comes from wanting to connect with you. Right, but the intensity of that want is just me being direct. Could be a compensatory mechanism for what? His voice rose a notch. Not angry, frustrated, which was worse because frustration meant he was still trying. I need to make a note in here. First date note. Examine for opportunities for deeper inner monologue. I can't talk and type at the same time. Doesn't matter. I'll know what I meant. Because the pace is like the dialogue is whipping, bam, 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 which is good. I think it needs to keep moving and not lose momentum. But I'm not seeing as much interiority, quite as much for Tessa as I would like. There has been some, which is good because honestly, it often doesn't rate that much at all, AI by default. So we have some baselines. It's just a matter of dialing that up a little bit more. I also think I might need to insert a little bit of something in here because I think this is escalating just a tad faster than I think it should. Even if I think for their characters, their characters are behaving how their characters should be behaving, which is a good thing. But it feels like it's escalating too fast because I think it's a little too on the nose. So I might need to blunt some of that coming back. But as a starting point for a rough draft, I do like that these two weirdos are in the ballpark of where I think they should be. Okay. It comes from wanting to connect with you, right? But the intensity of that want is just me being direct. Could be compensatory mechanism for what? His voice rose a notch. Not angry, frustrated, which was worse because frustration meant he was, okay, we're going to get rid of that. For being a person who says what he feels, is that a diagnosis now? I might say is that a condition now, or is there something wrong with that? Tessa felt the heat rose in her cheeks. She reached for her water glass and took a deliberate sip, buying time. And in the pause, she heard Artemis's voice again, barely above a whisper, drifting up from the tote bag like smoke from a vent. You just used your intake voice. Tessa set the glass down with a precise click. Clink? I don't know. I'm very nitpicky because I'm a perfectionist. He asked you a question, Artemis continued, and you answered with a diagnosis. Quiet, Tessa hissed at the bag. Eddie watched her hiss at her handbag. His eyebrows rose approximately a quarter of an inch. He picked up his menu. So, he said with the careful brightness of a man choosing to power through, have you been here before? Once for a friend's birthday. What's good? The bread course is excellent. Let's say something more exciting than talking about bread. They studied their menus in silence. Tessa could feel the date calcifying around them, the easy, terrible slide into politeness that meant the real conversation was over. and they were just running out the clock. That is correct. I don't know if I like calcifying, but I think that's the rest of that's pretty on track. Eddie's energy hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified. I'm not certain about that. Compressed by the resistance it had met. Again, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I want to see how the rest of this scene plays out. She could see it in the way he held his menu too tightly, reading it without reading. In his mind, clearly churning behind his eyes, looking for another way in. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. What made you sign up for CUPID? It was a reasonable question, a normal question, the kind of question two people on a first date were supposed to ask each other. I think I'm going to just cut a normal question. Tessa opened her mouth to give a normal answer and heard herself say, I was interested in the app's methodology. The screening process is unusually rigorous, and the success metrics are compiled from a relational outcomes perspective. Okay. This might be a step too far on her in therapy speak. I might want to dial that one off. Dial it back a little bit. Eddie stared at her. You signed up for a dating app because of its metrics? I signed up because she stopped. Because Artemis had been watching her cancel dates for 2 years. Because her apartment was quiet in a way that had stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like evidence. Because she'd read Eddie's profile and felt something warm and immediate and terrifying, and the only way knew she would survive that feeling was to bury it under language. Again, I'm not sure I agree with these statements. Because I was ready, she finished, which was both true and completely insufficient. Yeah, we can set that up a little better. Okay, Eddie set his menu down. I signed up because my friend Dev told me my biggest regret was going to be dying alone in an apartment full of other people's closure, and I realized he was right. That is inaccurate to how I wrote that scene. So we'll fix that. The honesty of it hit Tessa like a door swinging open in a room she wasn't ready to enter. She felt her head tilt again, the therapeutic angle, automatic as breathing, and forced it straight. That's very self-aware, she said, and meant it, but it came out sounding like a progress note. Eddie's smile went thin. Thanks, I'll add it to my file. From the bag, oh, this is going beautifully. Artemis. I'm just observing. Isn't that what we're doing? Observing? Tessa, some of this is good because Artemis is supposed to be the smartass, unfiltered voice of Tessa's own subconscious. So that is working well. How close are we to? Oh boy, I'm going to get to. I want to read to the end here, and then we'll get to the back half of this next time because we are at time. Artemis. I'm just observing. Yep. Tessa pressed her hand against the tote bag side. Inside, she felt Artemis's ribs vibrate in a purr that was less contentment and more barely restrained commentary. Not wrong, but I can phrase that better. Eddie leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a closed posture, Tessa noted, then immediately wished she hadn't noted, because noting it meant she was still doing the things she couldn't stop doing. He studied her with an expression that had shifted from open to searching, as if he was trying to find the person beneath the professional apparatus. You do this a lot, don't you? He said, the analyzing thing. I wouldn't call it, because it feels like you're not actually here, like you're watching this date from behind a two-way mirror and taking notes. I think that's functionally correct, and I'm going to cut out the denial in there just for streamlining. Say, it feels like, no, it's pretty close. I'm here, she said. Are you? I'm sitting right across from you. Physically, sure, but every time I say something real, you translate it into something clinical. It's like he searched for the word. It's like talking to someone through a window. I can see you, but I can't reach you. Okay, you made the. We've gone from two-way mirror to two-way window. That's redundant. Well, we're going to mix that up. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. It had weight. Tessa felt something crack at the edge of her composure. Not breaking, not yet, but shifting, the way the ice shifts on a lake before it gives. There's the rule of three, the not this, but that. So there's some AI-isms there. She wanted to say something honest, something that wasn't wrapped in jargon or buffered by professional distance. Here, 1, 2, 3. She wanted to say, you're right, and it terrifies me, and I don't know how to stop. I'm going to bold all of this. None of that is wrong, but I can streamline that paragraph more. What she said was, I think we might have different communication styles. Eddie exhaled through his nose. Yeah, I think we might. I kind of want to change this line to no shit. The bread arrived. Their server, a young woman with a charm-regulated... What is this nonsense? This is why we edit. With a charm-regulated smile and supernatural patience of someone who had witnessed hundreds of awkward first dates. Set a basket of sourdough between them with a small dish of herbed butter and retreated without a word. The bread was warm, the butter glistened. For a moment, neither of them moved. As if the bread basket were a ceasefire, neither of them wanted to be the first to accept. Again, not horrible, but I can condense it. Eddie reached for a bite. He tore it in half, buttered one side, took a bite. This is good, he said to no one in particular. Tessa took a piece. It was, in fact, excellent, crusty, and warm, with a tang that suggested the sourdough starter had been maintained with more devotion than most marriages. That one's good. I like that one. Did you take the new 7-line extension last week? Eddie asked, his mouth half full, the question so mundane and unexpected that it bypassed every one of Tessa's defenses. The one with the updated transit wards? Wards and charms. Wards and charms. I need to ban it from using the word norm, charms, and wards. The one that rerouted half the city through the Thornfield district for no discernible reason. Yes. Tessa set down her bread. It added 40 minutes to my commute. 40. And the rerouting charm. Had some kind of interaction with Artemis's fur. She went completely static electric for the ride. Also, Tessa has not formally acknowledged Artemis's existence, so that is something I need to think about with that line. From the bag and muffled voice, I will never give the Horizon Transit Authority for that. Eddie laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look years younger. A furious dandelion, that's... He pressed his hand over his mouth, laughing. Sorry, I'm still picturing it. Picture a cat who already has opinions about public transportation and then give her 3 times her normal volume of fur, all of it standing on end in a crowded subway car. Did people stare? A woman offered me a dryer sheet. Eddie lost it. He laughed with his whole body, leaning back in his chair, and the sound was so genuine and unperformative that Tessa felt something loosen in her chest, not she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She was smiling, not her professional smile, not her I'm actively listening smile, but the real one, the slightly crooked one that Artemis always said made her look like herself. The Transit Authority posted a statement, Eddie said, recovering. Did you see it? They called the rerouting a dynamic optimization of passenger flow. Dynamic optimization for a charm that sent me through 3 unnecessary districts and made me late to a client evening with a I can't read anymore. Made me late to a client meeting with a ghost who'd been dead for 40 years and still somehow managed to be annoyed by my punctuality. Bureaucratic language is its own kind of haunting, Tessa said, and Eddie pointed at her with his bread. That's good. That's very good. I'm going to use that. You're welcome to it. The dead would appreciate it. They have strong feelings about institutional language. You'd be amazed how many spirits are stuck here because of something that got lost in a form. Tessa laughed, and for a moment, 90 seconds, maybe less, they were just two people sitting across from each other, sharing bread and complaining about the city with the easy rhythm of conversation that had found its own current. So most of what I'm doing with this chapter here, based on everything we've read, is condensing some things down where it's a little bit wordy, or moments where I can rephrase things better. None of what it is written, except for maybe like one or two lines, seems wildly inconsistent to me, or inaccurate, or off the rails. So those are all good notes. Tessa's shoulders dropped. Her vocabulary shed its clinical weight. She wasn't assessing or annotating or scanning for red flags. She was just talking, and the person across from her was listening. All right, yeah, this is more we need to condense. And the space between them felt for the first time all evening like something she could actually breathe in. Inside the tote bag, Artemis's ears swiveled forward, her eyes half-lidded all evening, open wide. The faintest vibration of a purr started in her chest, tentative, almost hopeful, like the first note of a song she'd been waiting a long time to hear. Again, might cut that whole thing. But, so there we are. You can see from how much of this we've blacked out. So there's a fair amount of editing to do, but there's also a fair amount that is fine. One paragraph that, yeah, that's just, that whole thing is going to get cut. That was an unnecessary detail. Some things I'd be rephrased. That's a pretty solid, overall, I think that's a pretty solid start for an AI written rough draft, though. I don't hate it. And so now next time, on Tuesday, we will start with the back half of this date and see if things continue on a good trajectory, or if it goes off the rails in the back half, and edit and revise accordingly. But I think that was a good session. Got it down under 6,000 words. I would like to ultimately get it down under 5,000, maybe even under 4. We'll see how much trimming I can do there, but that's a good start. So want to thank everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned on Tuesday for the next episode in our series, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.